Coming up on Chasing the Natty, Week 8 has arrived, and we'll be touching on some of those big-time matchups and what we're looking for in them. Followed, of course, by another round of fan-submitted start-sit scenarios for this weekend. All this and more coming right after this.
Caleb Williams dancing, cutting, mesmerizing run by the quarterback.
Marvin Harrison Jr. touchdown. Marvelous Marv.
Home next to the outside, drop down for Franklin. Oh, majestic touchdown.
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast.
All right, welcome in, everyone. I am Justice, your guest host for the next 2 weeks on the Start Sit episodes, sitting in for Jared Palmgren. I am joined by the other host, Justin, Volume Pigs. Welcome, Justin. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, man. Hey, I'm doing good. Glad to be back on the show. Took a little bye week last week, so feeling refreshed, ready to go.
Yeah, this will be my third podcast in 3 days, so been busy. So before we get started, I'll do Jared's spiel here. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus to Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday and Wednesday morning during the season at 6 a.m. If you want to support the great work we are doing, head on over to campustocanton.com and subscribe there with one of our 3 tiers. You'll find everything you need for your CFF Devy, C2C, betting, and even college IDP, including articles, rankings, projections, tools, and so much more. You can also find Jared and the show on Twitter. Jared's at CFF_Jared, and the show is at Chasing the Natty. You can find myself at Justice_2318. In addition to working on college fantasy football and college IDP over at Campus to Canton, I also host a G5 only college football podcast focused on college fantasy football called the G5 Hive. And I also host a college IDP focused podcast called the Devy IDP Grind. Justin, you want to tell people where they can find you and your work?
Sure, yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Volume Pigs. In my profile, you'll see a link to a website called volumepigs.com. That's where all the articles that I write are basically housed. I'm also writing stuff occasionally on Campus to Canton. I appear occasionally on the Fantrax weekly waiver wire gemstone articles also. And of course, every week or every other week with Jared or a co-host on this show.
Awesome, man. You pump out so much work, like it's crazy. Like I don't know how you find the time, man.
It's a lot, yeah. It piles up. So I'm saying, I was on bye last week from this show, so I got a little bit of downtime, but not too much.
Good stuff. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with our first segment, and that is some matchups we are looking forward to. And the very first one I wanted to talk about was probably the biggest matchup in all of college football this week, and that's number 7 Penn State against number 3 Ohio State. Has a over-under of 46.5, and Ohio State is favored by 4 points. Something I'm looking forward to, like just from a pure college football sense, it should be a really good game. It's a noon game on Fox on Saturday. I'm interested to see like how the Ohio State offense looks against that Penn State defense.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what to make of the Ohio State offense really this year yet. I mean, McCord's sort of improved quite a bit. Obviously, Marvin Harrison's really good at football. Their wide receiver too, though, Emeka Egbuka has kind of been inconsistent, fluctuating. He hasn't really seen the targets that I would have expected preseason. And obviously, like the running back room is kind of just a mess. Like they just have a lot of injuries. Although I think Travion is supposed to be back this weekend. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, so I'm with you. Like from a pure college football standpoint, this is a fantastic matchup. There's actually a lot of good matchups this weekend. We're at that kind of time of the year now. So I mean, this is a real like gut check for Penn State. Like we're going to see how real are they this season. This is always usually the case. They start off the year usually undefeated, and then they play either Michigan, Ohio State, and that kind of gives you the litmus test of where they're at. On the Penn State side, I think the names in terms of CFF relevancy. I think we all kind of know. I mean, Drew L.R. He's not been fantastic from a CFF standpoint this season. He's been okay. The two running backs there, they're basically sort of cannibalizing each other. I mean, they have some good games here and there, but if you're in a standard league and you have to start one, that's just a nightmare trying to guess who's going to pop off each week. They do have their tight end, Tyler Warren, who's been sort of quietly productive. Tight end's just been a tough position.
Theo Johnson popped off last week as well.
Okay, yeah, they have two tight ends, and basically any tight end who scores a touchdown each week, you have to flag that. It's just a rough position right now.
Absolutely.
And this is a game where, it might be a lot of points scored. If you need a tight end, Warren might be a name you keep in mind. OSU has Cade Stover at tight end. He's been really good actually the past few weeks. So. Sorry, I'm rambling on here.
No, you're good. You're good. I mean, I'm Carnell Tate will probably start in place of Egbuka again. But I don't know that I would be rolling him out again in this game. I'd like to see Brandon Ennis get more involved as well, maybe. I know he got involved towards the end last week. He had, I think, like a 50-some yard touchdown catch, which was pretty nice to see. Penn State, I don't know if you can really rely on any of the receivers. Maybe Keandre Lambert-Smith, but it's just kind of like low volume, right? It's not a lot of volume. So
there's probably a better option. If someone's wondering in your league, there's probably a better option. Interesting you mentioned about Ennis too. Was that his first thing that he's done this season?
I believe yes. I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so because he's kind of he's been someone that people are worried about for that year 1-0 in their C2C leagues, and he didn't break those thresholds, but it's at least get on the field, so it's in progress, right? So it was just positive to see him get on the field, and hopefully he can continue to see the field some more as the season progresses.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, keeping sort of Austin's year 1-0 theory in mind. I know he was a heralded recruit coming in, right? And it's kind of tough at a school like OSU at that position, but typically, you expect them to get on the field at some point, do something. So that's an encouraging sign.
Yeah, and he didn't sign in the spring, or he wasn't enrolled in the spring. He didn't come till the fall, so it's a little bit understandable, why maybe he's didn't get as much love as Tate did, because Tate was there through the spring.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right, next up, Washington State at number 9, Oregon. The over/under on that game is 60, and Oregon is favored by 20. A few short weeks ago, we would have thought this would have been a bunch of fantasy goodness, but Washington State the last couple of weeks has kind of came crashing down to earth. Be interesting to see if they can do anything against Oregon. Oregon's defense is pretty decent. I'm sure they'll be fired up after losing to Washington last week. I don't know that I could confidently start any Washington State players in this game.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Cameron Ward, really promising start to the season. Last couple of weeks, kind of been on a downward slide. This is not a great matchup coming up this weekend. Oregon's one of the few teams west of Texas that plays defense, has a pulse on defense. They almost play like an SEC team. I hope that slide continues actually this week for Ward, because somebody I'm playing against has him in one of my leagues. So just from a pure selfish standpoint, that'd be great. I don't think you can start. They're actually really banged up also in the wide receiver room, save for Kyle Williams, maybe, who's not dealing with any health issues and has been decently productive. The other two, Josh Kelly and Lincoln Victor, are both kind of in limbo. I know Victor played last weekend, but clearly wasn't 100%. So this is not really a week where if you had Victor and you held on to him through his injury, probably you still don't want to play him this weekend, even if he's been cleared. You wouldn't start him confidently, at least.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on your options. He's in one of our start sits later on, and I think the upside's there, right? Because they're probably gonna be playing from behind, so there's gonna be a lot of passing. The question is really about his health, I think, and what your other options are at receiver or your flex spot Oregon obviously fire up Bo Nix, Troy Franklin, Bucky Irvin, even their tight ends. Ferguson's done well lately as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, on the Oregon side, I think as you mentioned, I think all the names there, we all know them. Shout out to Troy Franklin. That guy's on an absolute tear. Blitnikoff type seasons. A lot of good wide receivers in the Pac-12 right now, in addition to the QBs. So, I probably won't be watching this game, but it could be a sneaky good one from a CFF standpoint for the reason you mentioned, Justice. Washington State's behind, and they just pump their wide receivers full of targets. You could see sort of a backdoor way there of getting a lot of points back in the second half.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next up is one of my more favorite G5 games, and that's Colorado State at UNLV. UNLV surprisingly 5-1 on the season. They are favored in the game by looks like 8, and the over/under is 62. Again, this should be like start all your assets on both sides. I think it'll be a high-scoring game, shootout. Neither team's defense is all that great. So yeah, a Mountain West shootout Saturday night, 7 p.m. For Colorado State, Justin Ross Simmons. It's been reported that he had a hand injury last week. So that's kind of I think why we saw Dylan Goffney kind of take off. But Goffney started getting targets the week before as well. Obviously, you're starting Torrey Horton, Dallin Holker, Braden Fowler, Nicolosi every week. Goffney, I'd probably kind of wait to see what's going on with Justice Ross Simmons to see if he's going to play. But if I didn't have a lot of better options, I wouldn't be scared to throw Goffney out there. Lewis Brown's just been very inconsistent. I feel like not consistent enough that I'd want to start him on a week-to-week basis.
I think he's like a true freshman, right? Or a redshirt freshman. Like if I remember correctly, he's quite young. Like this is like his first season actually playing for Colorado State. So it's to be expected, I think, some of these like peaks and troughs for him. I agree with you regarding Goffney. I mean, you could do a lot worse. Like, it depends really like at how deep your league is and what the other options are. You have to throw him in the starting lineup. I mean, it's not the worst. Certainly, this is going to be a high-scoring game. High chance he ends up on the other end of a touchdown pass, especially if JRS is not, even if he plays but not full go kind of thing.
Yep.
You nailed it. I think everybody knows by now. Dallin Holker, especially now that Bowers is out, I guess it's tight end.
It's kind of the last man standing.
Last man standing, which makes me a little worrisome for him this weekend. But he continues to kill it. On the UNLV side, they've got some players too. It's just that none of their players are consistent. So it's kind of
Ricky White's probably the most consistent one, I guess.
Yeah, and even he's not right. Like, he scored over 20 points in 2 of the last 4 games, if I remember correctly. I wrote about him in a waiver wire report a few days ago. So if that number's not correct, I know he's had some good games in the last couple of weeks, but he's kind of up and down even still. And the quarterback play is also kind of inconsistent. That's probably why Ricky White's a little up and down. But this is a good game in terms of just the recipe for CFF success.
Yep.
And they've got that go-go offense over there. They've got some guys who, if you look at their track record as coaches, have had productive players at the wide receiver position before. Is Ricky White just a flash in the pan every other week kind of guy, or is he going to sort of carve out maybe a more consistent role going forward? I guess we'll see. I mean, we're at the midpoint of the season now, so if he hasn't done it by now, maybe it's not going to happen. But in terms of UNLV side, the player I'd probably like the most is Ricky White. They have a running back. Different running backs go off it seems like every other week, so it's hard to
Donovan Lester, Jaden Thomas. Yeah,
it's just hard to know like what's going on over there, right? Unless you're in the meeting room with the coaches. Who's getting the touches this week? Nobody really knows.
Right.
And their QB they have, actually, his name escapes me.
Jaden Maiava.
Something like that. Yeah, he's not bad because he's kind of like he has some dual credibility, if I remember correctly. He's not a bad punt play in this game. A lot of points are going to be scored. You never know. But it should be a fun game.
All right, moving on to another high-profile Power Five matchup. Number 14 Utah against number 18 USC in Los Angeles. USC is favored by 6.5 with an over/under of 56. This is a contrast of styles, right? You got the team that wants to run the ball and play solid defense versus the team that plays no defense and wants to throw it around. Um, there's been word this week that maybe Cam Rising and Brant Kuthi will sit the season out, or at least not play more than the 4 games where they could take a redshirt year. So I think what that means for Utah is a lot of running the ball. We actually saw them last week use their starting safety, Seoni Vaki, as a running back, and they used him. I think 2 weeks ago they started using him like as a wildcat quarterback. And then last week, in addition to the wildcat quarterback, they also used him as a more traditional running back, and he kind of went bonkers. I actually scooped him up in one of my IDP leagues. It's a little bit of a cheat code there, so I'm hoping he keeps getting those running back carries.
He's
But
still getting points, right, from the offensive side with that, right?
well, so in the IDP leagues I'm in, the 5 leagues that I'm in, I score them. I built a tool to score them, and it scores all the points. It doesn't matter what position they play, it scores all the points. That was a big topic of discussion in the offseason, but I already built the tool, and people got Travis Hunter. Obviously, they're starting him at cornerback, and they're getting his wide receiver and his defensive points. I'm of the opinion that like a player should get all the points he does on the field, right? You shouldn't be punished because he plays 2 positions.
Yeah, that's fine. I've never played IDP, so I don't really have an opinion on the matter. I feel like this is a strangely productive year, though, for these like cheese type. Like I don't remember there being a lot of like two-way players in years past like this.
No. Yeah, I mean you'll see it like on the offense side, right? Where
No, yeah,
the one that comes to mind is the receiver for Kentucky that played quarterback. I
like
can't think of his name, but like you're starting him at receiver and he's freaking getting 300 yards rushing every week.
yeah.
You see that kind of stuff. On a much smaller scale, we have seen this in the past with an offensive defensive guy. Oregon State last season had a linebacker that they would put into the game for goal line carries.
Yeah.
But he's getting 1 touchdown like every 3rd game or something, right? So it wasn't that big of a deal. Fantrax, like if you started Travis Hunter at wide receiver on Fantrax, you're only getting the wide receiver points. Fantrax doesn't count both.
Yeah.
But since Fantrax doesn't score tackles, I built a tool for the IDP leagues that I'm in. And so that tool basically takes all of our scoring and accredits to anybody you start on defense. But it's enough about defense. So Utah, Jaquindon Jackson, I'm sure people added Vaki with a lot of bye weeks this week. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be scared to throw him out there if I needed to. USC, you got Caleb Williams, Marshawn Lloyd, you got all the receivers. Any USC wide receivers I owned in my CFF leagues, I have since dropped because if it's not best ball, I just don't see the value in having them. That you can't predict who's going to go off every week, right?
Yeah. Yeah, if you can't play a player confidently, they're effectively like useless to you. It's sort of same with like the Penn State running back room. Obviously, each one is good, but like if you don't know each week that you can play them confidently, then probably you never will. So you might as well just drop them. So I understand the logic behind that. I agree with you in terms of the converted safety turned running back. I guess they came off a bye right last week, so they must have been like preparing for this, and then they just unleashed him against the suspecting Cal team last weekend. Yeah, interesting. I mean, he ran the ball hard. He did a good job. Obviously, Jaquindon Jackson came back, and he looked quite good. He had like 22 carries. He went over 100 yards in the score. So, yeah, I mean, it might just be the case that this is the identity of the team this year, where they're missing, the sort of 2 core components of the passing attack. And sort of their response is to try to just line up and run the ball. And in which case, there might be two TFF relevant running backs. Obviously, Quentin Jackson, everybody knows him, but there's also might be value in what is his name again? I keep forgetting.
Sauni Vaki.
There we go. Yeah, there might be value in him also, just if they run the ball, I don't know, 35, 40 times a game between two players. If he's still seeing around 20 touches, even if it is behind Quentin Jackson, there can still be value there. Certainly this week, right, against this defense.
USC is so bad on defense.
Yeah, they got a lot of holes. It does raise questions. How have they not figured this out yet? This is sort of the same problem that keeps coming up for Lincoln Riley. That's more of a philosophical, general question. At the end of the day, we know USC is bad on defense, so it's a good matchup in terms of Utah's players, especially the running backs. We saw Drake Estime. He cleared 90 yards last week. I believe he scored. He had a pretty good day, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, it should be a good game on the Utah side. Looking for Caleb Williams to bounce back also. He had a shocking performance last weekend. I think that was the worst we've seen him so far in his career.
Well, I mean that Notre Dame this Utah defense, I think, is just as good as that Notre Dame defense. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how he looks.
Maybe minus the inclement weather. I don't know how bad it
Right.
actually ended up being. I was watching the game and it didn't really look that bad. I do remember people saying it was going to rain. The forecast said it was heavy wind, so maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know, but yeah, that's Caleb Williams. Yeah, looking for a bounce back this weekend.
Yeah, I'm not sure like what the issue is with the USC defense. I mean, they have talent, at least from a recruiting standpoint, but they just can't seem to do anything with the talent. So I don't know if it's the coaching or the talent's playing for themselves and not playing for the team. I'm not sure what the issue is, but maybe this offseason they'll get it together.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, maybe this is the offseason. They finally do it. I don't know. I mean, yeah, the talent that they have signed good players. But to be honest, like all of those blue chips from like the 2020, 2021 class, like these guys are nobodies, right? Like Corey Foreman, like
Yeah,
I haven't
Corey
heard his name
Foreman.
since, right? Like some of these guys.
And you can see the talent, like Alexander, the kid that transferred over from Georgia. Like he's clearly talented. You watch him on an individual basis, like he's a pretty good player. But you got to surround them with other guys, and they got to get more out of the talent that they have.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, they haven't developed the players that they have. So.
All right, moving on to a Big 12 showdown, maybe perhaps a revenge game for Mr. Dylan Gabriel. We got University of Central Florida going up against Oklahoma. Oklahoma is favored by 19.5, and over-under on this game of 65. Last I heard, JRP is starting for UCF.
I heard that.
And I know I feel like some fans would rather see Timmy McClain. I mean, I just feel I don't know that McClain can beat Oklahoma. He might be the better, more complete quarterback, but I feel like they have a better shot if JRP is fully healthy. Oklahoma side, you got Dylan Gabriel, Jalil Farouk.
Yeah.
Angel Anthony is out now for the season, so it'll be interesting to kind of see who else will step up to join Farouk. As far as the wide receivers go, it seems like a pretty heavy rotation as far as the running backs there with Tyree Walker kind of leading the way. I guess to me, like the guys I'm absolutely starting is probably Gabriel and Farouk. Anybody else is probably going to be more dependent upon who I have on my bench.
Yeah, I mean, on the UCF side, if you have RJ Harvey, you might think about it. Although OU's defense is pretty legit. If you have Harvey and you're wondering whether you want to start him, I'd probably look at that Texas game and see how well Texas ran it. Like, did Brooks have a good game that I don't even remember?
He did okay.
Yeah, so that would be a data point I'd use if you're wondering about Harvey. I don't know if the quarterback that they use is going to matter that much in terms of their chances of winning. I feel like OU should handle business here.
They should, absolutely.
Yeah. But,
especially coming off the bye week.
We see strange things happen in college football all the time. So I never put it past teams to just go off the wire. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see how JRP looks first game back. I never expect much in terms of like when players come back after injury that first game. You can't really generally they don't just go from 0 to 100 like that just because they're
Yeah.
cleared all of a sudden. They're right back to where they were. Usually doesn't happen that way. So I think OU is going to handle business here. I don't know if Gabriel. Hopefully he does damage in the first half, and then second half, I would expect that the running backs would probably get leaned on just to close out the game. But you never know.
Yeah, I like interesting you said about the injuries. I generally like when a guy comes back, I like to see him play a game first if I can afford to,
Yeah,
before I insert him in my starting lineup. I mean, some guys are going to be automatic, like a Torrey Horton, for example. Like he's playing, you're going to start him. But some of the lower guys, like or mid level guys, I want to see them do it on the field before I insert them into my starting lineup.
yeah. It depends on like the nature of the injury, how long they miss too, right?
Yeah. All right. Next up is the highest score, or according to Vegas, the highest scoring game of the week. And it is another G5 matchup, 7 p.m. Saturday night. Utah State at San Jose State. San Jose State's favored by 5.5 with an over-under of 66.5. Utah State, supposedly McKay Hillstead should be back. He should be cleared from concussion protocol. There hasn't been anything official that says he will be the starter, but I mean, my guess is they're going to start him. So I think you need to kind of stay tuned to that. Regardless of which quarterback starts, Lagasse or Hillstead, if I own them, I'm probably firing them up unless I got better options.
Yeah.
And then obviously, Royals and Terrell Vaughn and Micah Davis too. If you don't, depending on if you're short, receivers on a bye week or whatever. I mean, those three guys are getting pretty much every single reception that that Utah State throws. I think it was like 2 weeks ago where they only three that caught the ball and all three had over 100 yards. So they're concentrating the ball to their playmakers, which is from a CFF perspective is great to see, right?
I was just going to say that's literally the recipe you're chasing, right? Colorado did some of this, and they still do it to a certain degree, where it's like the same three receivers are always getting the targets. Ohio State has done this in the past, right? So heavy and concentrated volume is really the name of the game. Utah State's definitely sort of taken that on. Early in the season, it looked like Vaughn was the clear. I still think he is wide receiver one. But they've got other guys now, especially Royals in the last 3 weeks. Like he's been exceptionally productive for them. On San Jose State side, I mean, they've got quite a few different players that sort of are interesting. Obviously, Cordero at quarterback has kind of had a disappointing year so far, but he's always live because he's a dual threat. I mean, he's always live for a 40-point.
Yep.
He can go off at any moment. And this is a great game. This is a great matchup for him. Kyrie Robinson, despite the fact that he doesn't really see consistent volume, like not the volume you'd sort of want necessarily for your RB1. He continues to score touchdowns. Like he
had a monster week last week.
Ridiculous week. Yeah, 3 touchdowns, I believe.
100 yards and 100 yards receiving. And I want to say 60 something. I mean, 100 yards rushing, 60 receiving, something like that.
Yeah, crazy week. He's kind of like the edge case or outlier of the volume pig philosophy. Generally, I feel like however many touches a player gets, that'll be correlated with how many points they get, more or less. 20 touches, they'll probably have 20 points. Robinson, though, has been really, really effective and really efficient with his touches, despite the fact that they have another running back there who sometimes inserts himself a little bit.
Quayle Conley.
Yeah. So, but hey, I mean, Robinson's been consistently productive, even if he's not consistently seeing crazy touches. So, if you have him, of course, you're going to roll with him this week. Utah State's defense won't scare you. It will be a high-scoring game. Somebody has to score touchdowns. Another running back's going to get involved for San Jose State. So, yeah. I mean,
Nick Nash. Nick Nash probably is the top receiver for San Jose State. You got tight end Dominic Maziotti.
Oh yeah.
I haven't heard if Sam Olsen's back yet or not.
Yes.
I know he was kind of the leading tight end for them early in the year, but he's been hurt the last few weeks, and Mazziotti's kind of stepped up in Olsen's absence.
Yeah, I mean it's worked out well. If you had Mazzotti on your team, he's kind of taken on more volume, more target volume. I know we're running on a while on these games, so yeah, I'll cut it there. We'll keep it short on this one.
All right, now we're gonna move on to our sit starts for week number 8. And we'll start off with the quarterbacks. This question comes from A Wood Sports on Twitter, and he wants us to choose one between Brady Cook versus South Carolina, DeQuan Finn against Miami, Ohio, and Jalen Rayner against Coastal Carolina. Three good options here. Finn has been very up and down. Cook, I feel like, has been very steady, and Rayner's like the ultimate kind of ceiling play. He looked great, 2 weeks ago, or I'm sorry, 3 weeks ago, and then 2 weeks ago before the bye week, Troy kind of shut him down. So you kind of worry is, did Troy provide a game plan for other teams in terms of stopping Rayner, and obviously more film on Rayner is available as well. You have any thoughts on these quarterbacks before we get to our picks?
No, I'd mirror mostly what you'd say. I mean, I think just inevitably, the more a player plays, the more film other teams have. So even if Troy, even if he'd still done well against Troy, he wasn't going to score 40 plus points every week, right? I think he did that back to back in his first two starts. Not too worried about him. I mean, again, you look at Troy, you look at the quarterbacks that have played Troy. Nobody does well against Troy from the quarterback position. I mean,
they're one of the better defenses in the G5.
I mean, you look at Austin Reed from WKU. You look at some of the other guys. I believe Will Howard, when he was still the starter at Kansas State, I mean, he got shut down. So I'm not too worried about Rayner. He's got a good matchup. I agree with you on the other two. Finn's up and down. Miami of Ohio actually is one of the few MAC teams, or of the MAC teams, I should say, who's pretty good at defense, like as far as MAC standards go. Brady Cook is a conundrum. He's been solid. I don't know why they don't let him run. He did a lot of running last year. He hasn't really done it this year. That seems to be a deliberate part of the plan, which is too bad for his CFF value, although he's still been solid as a distributor, just not quite the same ceiling that he might have had if they would let him run every now and then.
All right, so now we'll get to who we both picked. The blue is me and the pink is Justin, and we agreed. We both went with Jalen Rayner. I went with Rayner for the upside, right? I mean, he's got higher upside than both of the other two. If you needed a safer play, maybe you go with Cook. Finn would be the third option for me.
Yeah, I'm along the same lines. Definitely, it's an upside pick with Rayner. Again, I'm not putting too much stock into that game against Troy. I know it was disastrous, but they've got a good defense. This is a much better matchup. Rayner as a dual threat, I just like that he has that option. Obviously, Finn's a dual threat, but as I mentioned, the matchup isn't quite as good. So sort of a similar profile between the two. One just has a better matchup. Cook, as I just mentioned, they don't use him on the ground, even though he was a good runner last year. They're not going to use him that way, then it really doesn't matter. He's solid, and as Justice said, if you need a safe plug and play option, yeah, maybe that's the guy you might prefer. But sometimes you gotta take chances in CFF.
Absolutely.
Pretty upside.
All right, next QB question. This comes from Michael Erickson on Twitter, and he's asking about JJ McCarthy versus Seth Hennigan. You want to start us off here, Justin?
Sure, and I'm gonna try to remember which of these two I picked. I'm not gonna give it away here. I know how the format's going. Both of these guys are pretty similar in terms of just the profile this week. I think both of their matchups are good. UAB is really bad. They've been getting cut up on defense, and they also play pretty fast on offense, which I like. That's a good recipe for CFF success. Michigan is probably just going to dominate Michigan State, but I don't know that they're going to be passing all over them. They could easily this could be a game where Corum finishes with 4 touchdowns. Maybe Donovan Edwards finally scores a touchdown. I don't know what's going on with him. But this could literally be a game where Michigan just pushes the Spartans around. So it's there's more of that sort of risk in terms of McCarthy, where he might play the full game, but I don't know if he's going to be the guy who scores. Hennigan, he's been solid. He hasn't been great, but he hasn't been bad. He's never had a bad week, if I remember correctly. He's always sort of in and around 22 points at his lowest. Sometimes he'll get you 25, 26. This feels like a week where he'll probably get you 25, 26 points. He's got a good matchup. And he's also, he uses his legs as well. They're both these guys are kind of dual threat players, so they're pretty similar from that standpoint. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is it's a coin toss. I can see arguments for either player. On the JJ McCarthy side, if they want him to win the Heisman, he's gonna like to me that like this is where it starts in terms of like him producing some pretty big numbers. Um, I think is that realistic that he could win the Heisman? Absolutely. Just because his team's highly ranked, but his stats are gonna have to start bumping up there pretty significantly, I think, to kind of at least get closer to what we're seeing out of those Pac-12 quarterbacks. Hennigan, it is a great matchup, as you said. UAB is a high scoring offense, and so it's going to be a high scoring game. To me, it just. I don't want to give away who I picked, but I mean, it was a hard matchup. I just kind of went with my gut on who I felt safer about, maybe, and who I thought probably had a higher ceiling. But at the end of the day, I feel like when we look back at this next week, like these guys are going to be within a couple points of each other.
Yeah, probably. That's what I was going to say. I feel like we're going to discuss this at length just to find out like they both hit 25 passes in the end.
Right. All right, so we'll get to who we picked, and we disagreed. We each went our own way. I went with McCarthy for the same reasons I talked about before. Was I just feel like if they're trying to push him for a Heisman, this would be a great opportunity to show that.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle in terms of the off-field kind of angle of it, of what they're trying to do from an individual award standpoint. Certainly, he has the pedigree, right? 5-star kid, played 1 year at IMG. So he's got quite a bit going for him. And believe it or not, I feel like that stuff does matter in terms of the Heisman voting. Certainly, and I agree with you. His upside in this game, like maybe it's not Corum who scores all the touchdowns, like maybe McCarthy does, and he's involved with like 5 or 6. I don't know, like that Hennigan has that 40-point performance in them, even if this is a high-scoring game, because they've got some good running backs there too. It was a coin toss for me. Like I said, to be honest, I didn't even really remember. I was like, I think it was Hennigan, but I'm not really sure.
It is, and to Michael Erickson, like I couldn't blame him if he whichever way he went. I felt McCarthy had maybe a little higher potential ceiling, but like we said, at the end of the day, it's very possible they're going to be within 2 or 3 points of each other.
Yeah.
All right, so now we'll move on to the running backs. This comes from Ty Myers on Twitter, and he wants us to pick 2 between Imani Bailey against Kansas State, Dylan Johnson against Arizona State, and Carson Steele against Stanford. This one, I don't know. At least for me, it wasn't a very hard decision. I mean, all 3 of them are good running backs, but Steele and Johnson have been coming on strong, pretty strong the last several games. Bailey has kind of been more consistent throughout the season. The Kansas State, I mean, from a defensive standpoint, I don't know that you're really worried about any of these defenses. So to me, it just kind of comes down to like who I think is going to get the more volume in terms of carries and yards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the defenses, I would say Kansas State worries me a little bit. I mean, maybe I'm just thinking of what they were last year. Typically they're pretty good against the run. At least they were last year. And I think they've been okay this year, right? Against the run.
I mean, they're not a terrible defense. I mean, obviously Stanford's probably the worst of the 3.
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly the 2 Pac-12 opponents there are pretty weak defenses. So of the 3, those are the 2 that sort of stand out. And you named it too right at the beginning. Bailey, he's been more consistent. Certainly, in terms of season-long, value, I think he's been the better of the 3. Dylan Johnson, though, something I will mention is, Washington was in a lot of blowouts early on in the season, so his touch volume, it was hard to get a read on like what they were actually going to do offensively. And obviously, everybody thinks of this team as it's Penix. They're throwing it around. They've got 3 fantasy relevant wide receivers, maybe a 4th now with Giles Jackson. So it's easy to get caught up in that. But actually, the only 2 games that Washington was in that were close games, Johnson saw, I believe it was like 20 and 21 touches total on both of those. And he had good fantasy games in both of those. So if that's any indication of like what their game plan is in terms of if a game is competitive, we could be seeing like Johnson's value sort of ascend as the season goes on. I don't know that Arizona State's going to be that competitive matchup. Obviously that remains to be seen. Is this in Arizona State? Do you know? Like, is it in Arizona?
I don't know, but I
It is
can.
competitive. I would just point out that strange things do seem to happen within the desert. These Pac-12 teams go down and play Arizona State, so maybe hopefully that could be on the side of the Sun Devils and keep this game
It's
competitive.
in Washington.
Oh yeah, well then disregard what I just said. But either way, Johnson, if this game is competitive, I would expect he'll continue his trend in usage and steal as well. He's also in a similar vein with Johnson. He's really ascended in terms of his touches lately. I wouldn't say he's like the clear volume pig in the backfield because they've got other guys who still see touches. But I believe he had like 30 carries. It was either this past weekend or a week ago. They're really like handing it to him quite a bit now. Stanford's probably a team they can run the ball on a lot. So yeah, I mean, I found this question interesting. Actually, I didn't think it was that clear. I thought there were some interesting angles. I won't give my answer away. I know we're about to go to the next slide.
All right. So we both agreed. We both went with Steele and Johnson, and for me, the last 2 weeks they've been highly productive, and I just couldn't ignore that trend and choose Bailey over either one of them.
Yeah, for me, it was just a matchup. Really, that was kind of the tiebreaker. I was like, well, above all else, I believe Kansas State's a little bit better in terms of defense.
Yeah.
I have Bailey in one of my leagues. I've watched a little bit of TCU. I don't really like what they've been doing on offense. Like they're doing some weird stuff. They haven't been that effective. And lately, Bailey's kind of sputtered a little bit. So he was really good in September. These past couple of weeks in October, it's been a little up and down. Whereas the other two lately, they've been pretty hot. So why not just stay with the hot hand?
All right. We'll move on to our next running back question. This comes from Austin Smith on Twitter. And we need to pick one between Jalen Buckley against Ohio, Cody Schrader against Missouri, and Jermaine Brown Jr. against Memphis. You want to start us off here, Justin?
Yeah, sure. First thing I'll say is maybe take a look. I don't know like what the eligibility rules are in this person's league, but Jermaine Brown is wide receiver eligible in a lot of leagues. So you might want to consider like look at your wide receiver room, take a hard look, and really see if he is eligible. I'd just slot him in that wide receiver's position, and then take a look at these other two. Because both of these guys, Schrader and Buckley, they've got decent matchups. Ohio actually has a pretty good defense in the MAC.
Yeah, I think they're like a top 10 rush defense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's hard to put a lot of stock into these like top 10 rush because it's highly dependent on the teams you played.
On who they played, yeah.
We're at the point of the season where the sample's maybe big enough to defend against that a little bit more so than like end of September, so to speak. But even so, in terms of like MAC strength of schedule, Ohio seems to be pretty competent on defense. That worries me a little bit for Buckley. And he also just hasn't been the guy who's getting all the touches there. They have another running back who they have is pretty involved. He's got another weird name. I'm not even going to try to guess it.
Is it Salam?
There we go. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. And then Schrader is in a similar position. He sees a lot of touches in Missouri, but there is another Nathaniel Pete. At least last time I checked, he was still getting a decent amount of touches. But their matchup's not bad. South Carolina's kind of sputtering this year. They could easily win this game. You could see Schrader see 20 plus touches. So yeah, I mean, I would take a look at that. Like, if you're, because Jermaine Brown in the wide receiver position is absolutely like a cheat code. The amount of touches he sees. So that would be one thing I would mention.
Yeah, I kind of echo your sentiments, and that's an excellent point. That if Jermaine Brown is eligible as a wide receiver, you slot him in a receiver, and then you can you pick between Schrader and Buckley. One thing to note, Brown had been sharing time too with Isaiah Jacobs, and it was just announced that Isaiah Jacobs is out for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
So that's positive news for anybody that owns Jermaine Brown Jr.
Yeah, it's officially Jermaine Brown Jr. season over there. I mean,
that's right.
What we've seen in the last two games, I believe that's just going to continue. So he's going to be really productive, I think, down the stretch.
Yeah, and with that, I'll end the suspense. We both went Jermaine Brown Jr. And we both picked them before that news went out. So it kind of feels like maybe cheating a little bit now that the news came out about Isaiah Jacobs. But in order to get the graphics ready, we were going over our picks yesterday, and we both picked Brown Jr. Even before the Jacobs news. So I think the Jacob news just solidifies it even more, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I assume this person probably asked you probably before the news even came out. Well, obviously they did.
They did. They asked on Monday, I think, and they did. Austin did post because Jermaine Brown Jr. was a free agent that he did go ahead and as soon as he saw that news, he did go ahead and pick up Jermaine Brown Jr.
Yeah, his
But
other
maybe
leagues are going to be kicking themselves that they left Jermaine.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, let's do something a little extra here. Let's say he does put Jermaine Brown Jr. at wide receiver. Who would you go with between Buckley and Schrader?
I was just going to say that'd be a fun exercise to go through because these other two, that's an interesting question. This one, that would be hard for me to split hairs between these two. For me, I might still roll Buckley. Something about Mac's schedule, it always gives me that hope in the back of my mind. Crazy stuff is going to happen. Whereas SEC, it just feels like more of the defensive conference, though that's not really been the case this year. They're both in a similar position. Like there is another running back involved, but I think both are kind of the RB1A there. Buckley, he had an injury a few weeks ago, so he's kind of been coming back from that. But presumably, the further and further we get away from that, the more and more involved and explosive he'll be. So I might roll Buckley on the upside here, but it's for me.
Yeah, I agree. I'd roll with Buckley just because I think his ceiling is ultimately higher than Schrader's, right? Schrader probably has maybe a little bit safer floor. But Buckley, Buckley could go nuts for 30 points for you. I don't know that Schrader. I don't know necessarily the Schrader would do that.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to the wide receivers. This question comes from Benjamin Jacob on Twitter, and he's asking Lincoln Victor against Oregon, Josh Kelly against Oregon, or Lewis Bond against Georgia Tech. Man, this was. I mean, giving all the injury and such, this was a hard one to pick. I think, Victor came back last week. That was a positive. And like we talked about earlier when we talked about this game, the game script should be positive for Washington State in terms of having to throw it a lot just because they're going to be down. Lewis Bond's been kind of inconsistent. But, I think that's to be expected when Castellanos is your quarterback. And, he's really much more of a running back per se than a true pass at quarterback. This was a little bit hard for me to pick. You got the Kelly injury, right? We don't know what Kelly's going to look like. We don't know if he's even going to play at this point. We do assume that Victor will play. Anything you want to add, Justin?
Yeah, this is very difficult. And I legitimately actually do not remember. So did we have to start one or two from this question?
We just picked one.
Okay, I think I remember now. One thing I will say, Bond actually was pretty consistent through like the beginning of the season, and then there was that game against Army where Castellanos ran for like 4 touchdowns. I don't think he passed for any. That was his first game, I believe, Bond, when he didn't score a touchdown, or he might have had another one in there. But basically, every game he played, he'd scored a touchdown. So he wasn't, going for 20 plus points and having crazy games, but he was pretty consistent around the 15, 17 point mark, which I do like at wide receiver because it is a volatile position. I place a premium on guys you can sort of rely on to just get 16, 17 points. The two Washington State guys, both, as you mentioned, there's that uncertainty with the injury, uncertainty with the game scripts. You think they're probably going to be playing from behind. Hopefully they don't get beat up too bad to where like they just take starters out, right? Like especially if these guys are dealing with something, like you have aspirations to win other games throughout the season, you might say, well, why do we have Victor still in the game if we're down 25, 30 points in the second half? So there is that risk, although probably small. So I think I remember who I picked now, so I won't.
All right, we'll move over to that slide. So there you go. You went with Bond. I went with Victor. For me, it was just a more upside play. Bond is definitely the safer play of the group. To me, Kelly was easily the third choice for me.
Yeah, Kelly, I mean, he was productive already in the season before Victor went down. And like that first game Victor went down, he was really good. And, we were kind of wondering, oh, is that what's going to happen now while Victor's out? Uh, but it didn't really happen that way. It seems like Kyle Williams took up more of the slack. Just overall, actually, the offense just hasn't really been as good. So they really
Yeah.
just haven't produced the same outcomes there. Even the quarterback isn't doing quite well anymore. Uh, so yeah, uh, definitely there's upside there, Victor. I mean, when he's healthy, he's a candidate for CFF wide receiver one, no doubt. But I like Bond. I like his consistency. I think he gets back in the end zone this week against GT.
All right, we'll move on to our second wide receiver question. This one came from Andrew Bracht on YouTube, and we pick one between Keon Coleman against Duke, Pufele Ashlock against New Mexico, and Gage Larverdane against Toledo. This was a pretty hard one too. I mean, Coleman has looked very great for Florida State. Ashlock's been consistent, and Larverdane came back last week and scored 2 touchdowns.
Yeah. I love me some Larverdane. I have quite a few shares of his. He's a fun player. I'm glad he's back. When he's back, he seems to be clearly their target man. Toledo also, though, I will say, in the MAC is one of the better defenses. Something about these Ohio MAC teams. They seem to be the ones that are good on defense. Yeah, Coleman, I love his matchup against Duke. I don't know, though, if it was a great matchup maybe a few weeks ago, like when Riley Leonard was still healthy and they had everybody intact. It might be a game where it's more of a wash now for FSU, which might mean they hand it off to Trey Benson a little bit more rather than sort of push the ball downfield. So it's tough to say there. I don't want to overanalyze it too much. Ashlock, he sees consistent target volume basically since week 0. They're one of the few teams that played week 0. He was in a slump there. He hadn't scored in like 4 games, but he was still just based off target volume. I think he was always hitting around 10 points, maybe a little bit more. This past weekend, he had a great game. He saved me in one of my leagues. I won one game by 0.25 points. I needed Ashlock at the very end. He scored like 20 points or something like that. So, yeah, love me some Ashlock. This is a tough question. This is a great question.
It is. And that Duke defense is legit too. I also wonder if Duke is going to try to push Riley Leonard back, right? Because if Duke has any shot to win this game, he's got to play, but he's got to be effective too. If he can't be effective, then I guess there's no point. But it'd be interesting to kind of see what Duke does there at quarterback. But yeah, so let's get to who we each selected. I'll let you start us off.
Yeah, so I see we disagreed here.
We did.
For me, it was kind of a sliver between all three. I don't have a problem with starting any of them. I would not be unhappy to start any of them. Yeah, I like Larverdane, and again, something about his MAC matchups. It's just always so tantalizing. Just because I know it could always go sideways. Like at any moment, it could be 45, 55. Like it's just we've seen it happen every year. Ashlock. This is one of the few weekends where Hawaii actually plays at like a decent time, like 3:30. So finally, you don't have to stay up to watch his game, which that's nice. And they have a good matchup. They play New Mexico State or
New Mexico. Yeah, they're not very good. So
it doesn't really matter. They're both not great on defense.
Exactly.
I love that he's like a consistent target guy. It really came down to Larverdane and Ashlock for me. Both of those guys are clearly like the go-to. I wouldn't say clearly the go-to, but clearly like a focal point of the offense, right? Ashlock, there's McBride. They do some other things. Larverdane, though, I would say pretty much when he's healthy, he's definitely wide receiver 1 there. But they both see pretty good consistent target volume. I don't really think you can go wrong with either one of these.
Yeah, I agree. The reason I went with Larverdane is just because of the ceiling, right? I just feel like he could, have another monster game. Ashlock, like you said, he's just kind of been the model of consistency. Those were the 2 clear number 1 and 2s for me, with Coleman being a third. But yeah, I just felt like the ceiling for Larverdane wasn't something, or that potential. I just, I tend to take those kind of risks. Because you never know when you're going to need it, right? When you're going to need those 30 and 40 points, and I feel like Larverdane can do that, whereas Ashlock's going to be that consistent, 15, 16, 17 point kind of guy.
Yeah, I feel like it's a testament to how close it was for me that I literally just forgot that I didn't pick Like, I was looking at the graphic, I was like, oh, did I pick Larvardane? To be honest, like these two are interchangeable. If you had to pick one in terms of just the profile, I do agree with you. Larvardane definitely has like a higher ceiling. Ashlock, though, he's been sort of consistent. He doesn't really have any health issues, so I don't
Right,
know.
and yeah, we don't know we don't exactly know what the issue with Larvardane was. My understanding was something upper body, and so it's kind of a pain management thing. And
Yeah,
so, he could take a shot and be knocked out for the game again. We don't know that. And so, certainly in that situation, Ashlock's going to be the probably safer play, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, Larvardane looked pretty good last week. I think he's back, but yeah.
All right. Next up, we'll go to our flex questions. And this comes from Dynasty Central Sports on Twitter, choosing between Cameron Scattaboo against Arizona State, Robert Lewis against Georgia State, and Carson Steele against Stanford. I'll let you start us off, Justin.
Yeah, well, I guess we already covered Steele in the previous question, so I think our thoughts are clear on him. He's got a good matchup, and obviously he's sort of ascending in this target volume. So that's good if you're sort of thinking of playing him. Robert Lewis, he had that massive game in like gosh, it might have been week 3, week
Two or
4.
three, yeah.
Yeah, he scored basically like 50 points. I remember it only because in my home league, Felix Sharp, I was playing against him, and no disrespect to Felix, but I was just thinking like, oh, this should be a dub this week, no problem. And then he had Robert Lewis pop off like 50 points. He had another player went off for like 50. And I was just like, oh god. And I was looking the other day, and I was like, because I hadn't heard of Lewis's name since, and I was like, what's he been doing since? And I just looked at the stat line. He's basically been at like 16, 15, 10 points ever since. And I was like, oh, of course. And that's just how it goes in CFF, right? So he's kind of fallen off, right, since that week 2. But this Georgia State team, they do like to concentrate the volume, basically on all accounts. The running back sees all the carries. Lewis seems to get most of the targets. They have a running quarterback, so that limits the ceiling for Lewis. That's probably why he's not been more productive. Scatterbo has been great for Arizona State. They use him in a lot of different ways. Like I saw him maybe a few weeks ago attempting a pass in the game. He's catching passes, obviously. Of course, he's running it. He's a running back. Uh, Against Washington, though, it's kind of a tough matchup, but not enough to like scare me away from playing him. Like I know his role in the team. I know he's like a huge focal point in the offense. So I wouldn't worry. And I just saw sort of what Oregon did in terms of their running backs last weekend. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be too worried in terms of matchup to play Scatterbo. And hopefully, yeah, I don't think I've given away my answer on this one. So
No, I don't think you have. Yeah, I mean, you saw what Bucky Irving did against Washington last week, right? And Scattaboo kind of serves a similar purpose for Arizona State. And Irving, produced last week. I do feel like Washington of the three defenses, they are the best defense. But as you said, Scattaboo's kind of he's the focal point of the Arizona State offense as well. So, yeah, it was not. This one wasn't. When I first saw the question, like I thought it was easier. Once I kind of did a little more research, it wasn't as easy as I thought it was. So with that, we'll kind of get to who we each picked. I did go with Carson Steele, and I think I just gave him the edge because of the matchup against Stanford.
yeah, I mean that's fair enough. For me, it was close between those two. Lewis for me clearly was third.
Yeah, yeah.
So it came down to sort of the two running backs, and in general, I prefer running backs in the flex position, even if it's one PPR. I just like the guys who I know are going to see more touches. That's kind of the calculation. And both Steele and Scatterbo definitely fit that volume pig tag, right? But you have to pick one. It's kind of splitting hairs. Scatterbo doesn't split carries really with anybody else. He's really the main focal point of that team. So that was kind of the deciding factor for me.
Yeah, and you make an excellent point. I don't remember this question set up as PPR or not, but if it's anything less than one PPR, then like it's to me it's very clear that it's one of the two running backs.
Yeah.
So, all right, moving on to our next flex question. This comes from Mitch Hart on Twitter, and it's Sam Brown against. This is a full PPR league. Sam Brown against Houston, Anthony Grant against Nebraska, and Jace McClellan against Tennessee. This was kind of a tough question, I felt. Sam Brown's kind of been the focal point of the Houston passing attack. Um, Golden got injured last week, set out the second half. No word on whether he's going to be healthy or not this week. But even when Golden's there, I feel like Sam Brown's kind of the top guy, maybe. At least from a production standpoint, he's producing more than Golden is. Anthony Grant going against Northwestern, not a great defense, right? I'm going to assume Jeff Sims is going to be back, but we don't know. Regardless, I feel like Nebraska relies on the running backs here in this situation, and then Jace McClellan against Tennessee. They got Roydell Williams, they got Jace, they got Milrow. That's kind of a crowded backfield back there, I feel like.
Yeah. It's a lot of straws in the milkshake for Alabama.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I'm with you on a lot of what you said. I mean, Anthony Grant, he's like the last man standing in Nebraska's backfield. And of these three, well, certainly of the two running backs, I feel the most confident that he'll see 20 touches. I know Sam Brown won't, but Anthony Grant, in terms of these two running backs, I think is going to, more likely to hit 20, 25 touches, probably 20 carries. And this is this is a team that Nebraska could actually move the ball on fairly well, right? A lot of their matchups, it's like Grant's probably the guy who gets the touches, but it's not going to matter because they're playing Michigan or such, and they're just going to get absolutely crapped on all game. But this is a game where Nebraska could probably move the ball. Probably they're going to score a lot. They're probably going to win the game. So he's a guy where it's like, in terms of who do you know who's going to get the touches, I feel pretty confident about him. Cullen obviously has that high ceiling because, skill set's hot, really good. He's a good runner. He's a good pass catcher, but, I don't know. They have a running quarterback who steals rushing touchdowns left and right. They have Roydell Williams, who randomly might go for 20 carries, as we've seen throughout the season.
Yeah.
So that's just a weird offense. It's hard to really rely on anybody in that one. It is a decent matchup, though. It should be a close game. They should be back and forth. Should score a lot of points. And then Sam Brown, yeah, I don't like his matchup. That's kind of the thing. I watched
definitely the best defense of the three.
Oh yeah, and I watched some Houston offense earlier this season. Wasn't impressed by Donovan Smith. I know he's sort of improved these past couple of weeks, but he just didn't really look that good in the games I was watching in terms of just his ability to be effective, and that worries me in this game against Texas. I do worry that they might just completely have their doors blown off in this game. Again, hopefully didn't give the answer away. It's a good question. Interesting angles to evaluate.
Well, I guess the positive for Sam Brown and Houston is they should be down, so that should equal more passing, right? The question is, can they be successful at it?
Exactly.
All right. We both agreed here. Anthony Grant, to me, was the easy choice. Just feels like the highest ceiling, the safest, all the above, right? For me.
Yeah, it's just a good recipe. Like, it's one of the few games for Nebraska, right? Like, he always gets the touches since the other running backs are down. But most games, it doesn't matter because they're so outmatched. This is one of those games where Nebraska is more talented than the team they're playing. So it feels like a good recipe, right?
Absolutely. All right, now we'll move on to the tight ends. This comes from Michael Erickson on Twitter. And the question is, RJ Maryland against Temple, Colston Loveland against Michigan, and Shimon Mateer against Baylor. You want to start us off on this one, Justin?
Yeah. The tight end questions these days are getting hilarious. There's hardly anybody left, right? So RJ Maryland, preseason, he was a hot name. He's a guy probably was drafted 8, 9, 10 round range, most drafts. In a lot of your leagues, he probably got dropped maybe a couple of weeks ago, but he's actually improved, seemingly, from a CFF standpoint. I think he had a good week 1, then there was a big lull there, and then he's basically had back-to-back weeks now where he's been good. He's been productive in terms of tight end standards. I love this matchup against Temple. We just saw North Texas play Temple. It was a good game in terms of production for all the assets. involved on the North Texas side, especially. So I'd expect SMU in this game. They're going to be able to move the ball. They're going to score a lot of points. RJ Maryland, they don't really have a clear alpha wide receiver. But kind of, if you're a Maryland holder, for sure, you're kind of hoping maybe he sort of ascends into that role. Certainly, though, he's a big part of the offense. He gets his targets, and that's more than you can say about most tight ends. The other two, Loveland, I know he's kind of been solid. This is another good matchup, also, of course, against Michigan State. We touched on it earlier. But as I mentioned with McCarthy, I do worry that maybe this is a game where Michigan just relies on the run, condenses the game, bruises the Spartans, scores a bunch of rushing touchdowns, and then just gets the hell out of there. So there is that concern. And then in terms of Cincinnati's tight end here, I don't know as much about him. I think he had a solid game last weekend, but like before that, I don't believe he's been that productive. I should probably look that up as I'm talking.
He's really come on the last 2 weeks. It's been the last 2 weeks where he's been getting some volume and red zone looks.
Yeah.
Before that, he was like non-existent.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, with tight ends, it's like it's hard to find guys who are just consistently. So that's not a huge red flag for him. Their quarterback's obviously more of a run first guy, whereas SMU, Preston Stone, feel is more of a distributor. McCarthy definitely can hurt you along the ground, but he's probably more of a distributor first. Emory Jones feels more like a runner first rather than distributor. So there is that. Although obviously the last couple of weeks, he must have been finding Mateer in the end zone or at least connecting on some targets. But for me, this one was kind of clear, and maybe it's just based off the name brand value and the preseason value. I'm giving my answer away, but for me,
I mean, they're all. If you just look at points, right? They're the last few weeks. They're fairly even. The one differentiator I think for Loveland is his points are really predicated whether he gets a touchdown or not. Right? Mm-hmm. He's not necessarily getting He's not. I don't feel like the last 2 weeks anyway. He's been seeing the volume that the other two guys have, but he's gotten touchdowns, and so that's kind of predicated his fantasy score. And for me, you just can't. Touchdowns aren't reliable, right?
Yeah,
you kind of want to see that volume.
Those are the ones you want to probably avoid usually when you're looking at tight ends, like because again, it's slim picking. So a lot of these guys, you see them, it's like their points might be okay, but if he scored like a touchdown in 3 straight weeks, chances are he's probably not going to score this week. You know what I mean? So yeah. Okay, well, I guess we'll go to the next.
I mean, I went with the hot hand. With Mateer, just because the last 2 weeks he's been the man. But I certainly couldn't fault your choice of RJ Maryland. RJ Maryland of the three has definitely been the more consistent. If you can use that word with a tight end, right?
Yeah. Well, the bar is low, so yeah. I mean, I think you're kind of. It wouldn't surprise me again if all three of these players ended up with like 8 to 9.
It's going to be who got the touchdown and who didn't.
That's pretty much going to be the differentiator, which honestly, that's impossible to predict.
And they all have good matchups, right? None of these defenses are like great defenses. So, yeah. All right, we'll move on to our last tight end question, and once again, it's one of the we only got 2 tight end questions, so they both made the show. Again, we got Shimon Mateer, Cincinnati, versus Jaheim Bell, going against Duke. I'll let you start us off here, Justin.
Sure. Yeah. Well. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we just discussed Mateer, so I guess our thoughts are known on him. Bell at FSU, it's a good matchup. I know Duke's defense is good. For me, I'm looking at that as FSU is more talented than Duke, so I'm hoping that Duke. I know Duke's been good this year, but if Leonard's not playing, I'm just hoping Duke keeps it competitive, forces FSU to have to pass the ball, lean on their best players, and then it doesn't just become a wash. So the fact that Duke can play some good defense actually doesn't bother me that much. I just hope they keep up on offense.
Yeah.
Bell, he started off at South Carolina. He was sort of a really hot sort of name in CFF. I believe it was last offseason because he was getting carries and targets for the Gamecocks. And then obviously, he kind of had a disappointing year last year, transferred to FSU. This year, they're using him though at FSU. Like he gets good usage over there. I know they have other guys, right? They've got Coleman, they've got Wilson, they've got a couple of running backs, so they've got a lot of guys, and even Travis. What his name is now escaping me. Travis, what's his last name? Anyways, Jordan Travis.
Jordan Travis, and then they got Morlock also at tight end.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, the other guy who's a transfer, FCS transfer, I believe. So
Yep.
yeah, they've got a lot of players. They're just very explosive, a lot of names. But even still, I like Bell this week. He's one of the better tight ends this year. I know most of them are not even playing anymore. They're injured or missing time. So I think both of these guys are kind of fairly close. It's a good question.
Yeah. I think it comes down to what you want, right? Bell's has been very boomer bust, I feel like, right? He's either going for like 20 points or next to nothing. Not much in between. So with that, I'll get to our selections. And we disagreed. I went with the hot hand again, and you went with Bell. Bell certainly has the higher ceiling, I feel, of the two.
Yeah, no, I just pulled up Bell's stats here. So it's one of these things in CFF where like you look at the FPG average of players. A lot of times, you'll see similar averages, but if you look under the hood,
I think you got to look at the games.
Some are actually in that range consistently. Some like Bell are just up and down. The tight end is one of those positions for me. I don't mind. Well, it's not that I don't mind that, but in terms of like the options you have, it's not the worst to just take a swing each week. Like, maybe he gets next to 0 points that week, and hopefully you still win. But the off week where he gets 20, the chances that you won that week are very high. It's just a position that it's so scarce. There aren't really consistent contributors. So
outside Dallin Holker, right, or even Holden Willis at Middle Tennessee.
Yeah, well, Holden Willis, if he's eligible in your league, I know he's
if he's eligible as a tight end.
Yeah, well, Dallin Holker, of course. Yeah, if you have him, you're not worried about. You're probably not submitting questions to this show.
Outside of those two guys, I just don't know what other reliable week-to-week options there are, right?
No, so that's kind of my logic with Bell. Again, matchup's good. You can swing for the fence with him, but at the end of the day, I think both of these tight ends are pretty close. I'm just looking at their stats right now. So I think one's more upside, one's more consistent. At least one's more consistent lately.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Bell's definitely. I feel like Bell's definitely the upside play. Mateer's probably the safer choice. And like you said, I think tight end's a perfect spot to take a gamble with an upside guy, right? Because you got the chance of Bell of 20 points, whereas most times your tight end's scoring you 5. You're happy if your tight end's getting you 5 to 6, right?
I was just gonna say, like most people's tight ends get you 5 to 10 points. So if you take a 0 that week, like even if you DNPs, it's like does it really matter that much? Like it's not that big of a difference.
Nope. Excellent point. So that's going to do it for our start sit questions this week. We'll be back next week with you. I will be back. Justin will be back taking your questions for week 9. Hopefully, any questions we didn't get to, I know I'm going to try to go to Twitter and answer those questions. I did answer some of them in advance because folks were asking us about players that are actually playing right now when we record this Tuesday night. So I tried to go ahead and answer those questions because we obviously didn't want to include those on the show because by the time you can hear it, the game's already going to be over. So it'll be a moot point. But yeah, any questions that aren't answered on the show, I'm going to try to get to Twitter either later tonight or tomorrow, Wednesday, when you're listening to this, to try to give you guys my thoughts and my answers. And thanks for listening. Once again, you can find me at justice_2318. You can find my work over at Campus to Canton, also the G5 Hive, Devi IDP Grind. Justin, how about you?
Yeah, well, I'll just give you a shout out too on your show. I was watching it the other day. I saw you had Cats on as a guest. So
yes, we did last night.
And Luke, good stuff you guys got going over there. You can find me, see a little handle there, Volume Pigs. It's in my Twitter profile. I'll be tagged in the post here. I've been on every week, so if you're not following me by now or subscribed, probably it's not going to happen. But if you're just discovering this for the first time, check me out. I do CFF articles. I write at C2C also, Campus Canton. Like I said, also I'm doing some of the waiver stuff and fan track, so I'm all over the place. You can't escape me.
No, you mean he puts out articles like he's a madman, like, and it's quality content. It is, and it's not only like what I appreciate it most, it's not just useful, actionable information, but it's like it's entertaining to read, right? His writing style is very it's unique. And it's awesome, man. Like if there was like an Oscar, or I don't know what the right word is, but for college fantasy football articles, like Justin would win hands down. Like his writing acumen is second to none in my opinion. So if you're not checking him out, like you're missing out, like just from a pure entertainment standpoint, much less the knowledge and the information that he's giving to you guys on almost a daily basis. So yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I might not live up to that expectation. I mean, that's high praise, but thank you.
All right. You can follow the show on YouTube, wherever you listen to the podcast. Also, as we mentioned earlier, if you're not a member of Campus to Canton, you are certainly missing out. We have anything and everything you need from CFF, Devi, Campus to Canton's leagues, as well as, like as I said earlier, we have stuff for betting and some college IDP stuff as well. So until next week, we will see you, and thanks for listening.